Have you ever dreamed of someone who left and woken up feeling more real than anything around you? As if time had stopped just for that moment to exist? As if the entire universe conspired to make that reunion, even impossible in the eyes of the world, happen, just so you could hear one sentence, one single sentence that would change everything? Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're still waiting for that sign. What if I told you this happened to me? It wasn't an ordinary dream. It wasn't just longing transforming into an image in my mind. It was something that touched me in a way I'll never forget. One of those moments when we feel like the veil between what we see and what we don't see has torn for a few seconds, revealing a greater, deeper truth that can't be put into words. Her presence, my mother, was there, alive in essence, even without her physical body, looking at me with the same love as always, but with a peace that doesn't belong to this world. And without saying much, she hugged me. And in that hug, everything stopped. It's hard to explain the intensity of what I felt. It was as if my soul recognized something the human mind could never understand. It was acceptance. It was healing. It was spiritual connection. But it was what she said next, that single sentence, that truly shattered me inside. It was exactly what I needed to hear. Not something I wanted, but what my soul silently begged for. An answer I didn't even know I was searching for. But when it arrived, it made everything fall into place. This experience affected me in a way nothing else had. It awakened memories, opened old wounds, and at the same time, brought a kind of peace that has never left me. You know that feeling when someone is trying to tell you something from the other side? That the signs are there, but we don't always pay attention? So, stay with me, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. Right now, as you hear these words, something inside you is stirring. Some memory, some absence, some embrace you still miss. Maybe you've experienced something similar, a dream that seemed all too real, a sign that came when you needed it most, or even a silence filled with presence. And you know, that's precisely why this space exists, because every story we share has the power to shine a light on someone else's. So, if you've ever felt something like this, or even if you're searching for this kind of connection, write it down in the comments. Share your experience, what you felt, what you believe, or even what you're still trying to understand. Sometimes, a simple sentence from you can be the answer someone else was waiting for, and that transforms everything. If this content touched you so far, if it somehow spoke to your heart, click the like button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps this channel continue to exist, reaching more people who need to hear exactly what it is. And if you feel like continuing to walk along, delving deeper into these topics that we don't always get to discuss with everyone, subscribe, because there's so much more we'll experience, discover, and share here. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. It's what strengthens this community of people who feel, who believe, who live the invisible with an open mind. And knowing you're here makes all the difference. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. The truth is, no matter how much time passes, some pains don't disappear. They just learn to hide better in our days. My mother's absence didn't just become a beautiful longing or a serene memory. It became a silence inside me that no one else could fill. You know that feeling of being surrounded by people but missing a single voice? Of experiencing achievements and, in the next instant, thinking, how I wish she were here to see this. It's a longing that has a smell, a sound, with entire moments that return in flashes. And, at the same time, an emptiness that has no name. This absence taught me a lot about presence. Because even after everything, even without the physical embrace, the spontaneous calls, or the advice only she knew how to give, the love remained. And it was so strong that it sometimes manifested itself in ways I was still learning to understand. But before that, there was a hole that was hard to name. The pain of loss isn't just about the person who's gone, but about everything that will no longer happen. It's like a timeline that's been interrupted, and you move on, but always with the feeling that something very important was left behind. And therein lies one of the hidden truths that few have the courage to say out loud. No matter how hard we try to move on, Some losses transform us profoundly. They change our mindset, the way we see the world, the decisions we make, the relationships we cultivate. The loss of my mother was at once an open wound and a portal, because it was precisely through this pain that I began to see signs that had previously gone unnoticed. Small details, gestures, words that seemed isolated but carried messages. And they weren't generic messages. They were hers. It's as if, somehow, the bond between us had never been severed. It simply changed form, frequency, language, but it was there, present, alive. And even on the days when the longing was so overwhelming I could barely breathe, there was something invisible sustaining me. It was the subtle yet intense presence of someone who was no longer on this plane, but who somehow never stopped being with me. There comes a moment when longing screams so loudly inside that the world around you seems to go silent. You smile on the outside, but inside you harbor a request that won't stop. It doesn't need to be said out loud because it vibrates with every beat of your chest. Give me a sign, just one, anything. And sometimes this request doesn't even come with words, it comes with tears streaming down the silence of the room, with the wet pillow in the early morning, with that lost gaze at the window waiting for the wind to carry an answer back. What few people talk about is that there is a language born of pain, and it doesn't need sound to be understood. It is made of raw feeling, of surrender, of total vulnerability. And in this state, where one no longer has control over anything, the heart opens, and that's when something happens. I remember one night in particular. Nothing much had happened that day, but something inside me was silently imploding. I sat on my bed, the light off, and instead of praying with words, I closed my eyes and just breathed. It was as if every part of me was crying out for help, even without knowing exactly what to expect. And the curious thing is that in those moments, when you've already given up controlling what you feel or what you want to hear, is when the unexpected reaches you. It didn't come as a voice in the room nor as a visible presence, but it came in a way that only those who have experienced it understand. A warmth that filled the room, a peace that made no sense, a feeling so real that my heart stopped for a moment. It was then that I realized my request had been heard, that my soul had been touched, even without a rational explanation. It's at this point that we begin to realize that there's an invisible frame that moves when we truly surrender. Sometimes, you don't even need to verbalize what you desire. You just need to feel it. And the universe, or whatever you call this higher power, responds. It could be in a memory that comes out of nowhere, in a song that plays just at that moment, in a sudden feeling that someone is nearby. It could even be in a dream, and not just any dream, but the kind that leaves you crying awake because it was so intense it felt real, or rather, it was real. And that's where the shift in mindset begins. You stop looking for signs with your eyes and start perceiving with your heart. You stop waiting for ready-made answers and start trusting what you feel. Because the spiritual world doesn't speak our literal language, but communicates through emotion, intuition, and presence. It doesn't matter if you're praying on your knees or just standing still, silently, trying to reconnect. What matters is openness, the inner space you create for this connection to happen. Because deep down, the silent request you make isn't for an answer, it's for acceptance, for the certainty that you're not alone, for a way to carry on, even when absence seems greater than everything. It was a seemingly ordinary night, the kind you just want to sleep to forget. No unusual noises, no flashing lights, no glaring coincidences. But inside, something felt restless. I was lying down, but it was as if my body were there, and my soul wandered through an invisible field, searching for some answer, some direction, or even simple relief. There was a heavy silence in the room, the kind that doesn't comfort. It suffocates. And even though my eyes were closed, inside everything felt alert, as if something was about to happen. It was like an emotional tension building without me understanding why. A weariness that wasn't physical, but existential. That feeling that life is happening out there and you're stuck in the wings, without a script, speechless, directionless. My mind whirled between memories and questions, between longing and fear. Longing for my mother, fear that the void she left would never be filled. It was strange to think that even after so much time, I still felt as if something were unfinished, as if, deep down, there was still a pending conversation, an unspoken hug, a sentence that was never said. I wasn't expecting anything that night, and perhaps precisely because of that, everything opened up. It was as if the universe had seized that moment of complete surrender to bring a revelation, and it was then that the atmosphere around me began to shift. There was no sound, no strange light, but a presence. You feel it before you see it, a warmth that slowly invades, as if someone had entered the room and sat beside you, without disturbing, without demanding, just being there. And the strangest thing is that you don't feel fear. On the contrary, you feel welcome, something greater than logic, yet speaking directly to the soul. And in that instant, before any image even formed, I knew. I can't explain how, but I knew. She was there, my mother, not as a memory, not as a construct of the mind, but as a real presence. And that made time stand still. It was as if the clock had lost its function, and only the eternity of that moment remained. The room remained the same, but the air had changed. It was lighter, denser, more alive. I remained still, not out of fear, but out of respect, like someone who recognizes they are before something sacred. And then, without any sudden transition, everything transformed. I can't say if I fell asleep or was taken. I only know that, suddenly, I was no longer there. I was somewhere else, not physical, but completely real. A space that seemed made of emotion, of memory, of pure truth. And in the center of that place, she, standing, with the same gaze I've never forgotten. That motherly gaze that sees everything without you saying a word, that understands without question, that welcomes without condition. She smiled, and it was in that moment that everything made sense. There was no more longing, no emptiness, no doubt, only presence, only love. A love that cannot be defined, that needs no explanation, that does not die with the body. She approached slowly, as if she doesn't need to rush time because she knows that time has no control there. And when she embraced me, there was no weight, no pain, there was completeness. It was as if every broken part inside me had been silently stitched together. She didn't need to say anything, yet. The embrace alone said everything her entire life had tried and failed to express. Her embrace wasn't like any other I'd experienced up until that point. It wasn't made of arms, weight, or physical contact. It was as if every cell in my body had been enveloped by something that couldn't be explained, only felt. A gentle, warm force, impossible to contain or ignore. In that instant, it was as if time had receded, as if it recognized that it wasn't welcome there. Everything around me fell silent, a silence so profound it wasn't frightening but healing. I felt enveloped by something greater than myself, as if protected by a truth that had always been there, but which I was only able to access in that moment. It was her, but not just her image. It was her energy, her essence, the living presence I carried in my memory, only now magnified, cleansed of any pain, any limits. I could smell her, not with my nose, but with my soul. A mixture of memory and eternity, as if the universe had sealed that memory with a seal that it was real. And it was. No rational argument can undo the certainty that remained within me. Her embrace was not a fabrication of a weary mind. It was a reunion, a moment of reconnection between two worlds that seemed separate, but touched naturally there. The curious thing is that my body, even in a dream, or in a trance, I'm not sure, reacted. It was as if I had become a child again. I felt welcomed, protected, as if every wound had found its healing there, in silence, between touch and feeling. She didn't say anything right away, and honestly, she didn't need to. The embrace spoke. It said, "I am here." It said, "Nothing is lost." It said, "Pain does not define you." And in that moment, I understood. Certain presences never go away. They merely change form. They leave matter and become part of the air we breathe when we remember with love. My mind wasn't racing, as it usually does. There were no questions. There was no rush. It was like being faced with an intimate revelation that only makes sense when you stop trying to understand and just accept it. And there, in that moment, so out of time, something inside me shifted. I felt there was something beyond absence. That absence wasn't the end. It was the path to another form of presence, one that doesn't require open eyes, but an awakened heart. And that turned a key inside me, a key that unlocked a new way of seeing everything. Her embrace was more than comfort. It was an answer, one of those answers that comes not with words, but with feeling. And perhaps that's the true impact of spiritual encounters. They restore parts of us we thought we'd lost forever. That moment made me realize that pain hadn't erased love, and that love indeed is what endures. Strong, unchanging, tireless. Love is what allows us to feel that connection still exists, even when the world tells us it's over. And the longer I remained in that embrace, the more I dissolved into it. It was as if there was no longer a separate me. I was the embrace. I was that moment. I was the reunion. Everything blended into a state of lightness that bordered on the divine. My chest, which had previously been heavy with longing, now opened with a kind of serene, almost sacred joy. And if anyone asked how I knew it was real, I would say, because nothing in my life had touched me with such truth. It was when she pulled away a little, not physically, but energetically, that something shifted in the air around me. Still enveloping me with the same calm, with that silent tenderness only a mother possesses, she looked at me with a caress that seemed to penetrate every layer of my soul. Her eyes spoke neither of haste nor of farewell. They spoke of truth. That truth we don't read in any book, but recognize when we hear it. Time once again seemed suspended, and then she spoke. A single sentence, simple, clear, as if she knew exactly what needed to be said and said it with a precision that comes not from reason, but from the heart. She said, "You are ready." At that moment, my entire body reacted. It was as if something inside me had been unlocked, as if all the questions I'd been carrying, and which I couldn't always name, had found a single answer, self-sufficient. "You're ready." It wasn't just any statement. It was confirmation, a reminder of something I might already know but couldn't bring myself to accept. And the way she said it, it was as if she were giving me permission to move on, as if saying, gently and firmly, pain no longer needs to be a shelter. Life is calling you, and you can answer it. Her tone of voice held no weight. It had presence. It had that vibration that echoes more in the chest than in the ear. It was as if the words carried a frequency that cut through any fear, any resistance. And the look? Oh, the look. It wasn't that of someone leaving. It was that of someone who's seen the other side of the road and knows that, even with the curves and potholes, we'll make it through. And that broke me inside, but in a good way. Because the break was from something I didn't even know still held me back. The fear of going on without her. The fear of not being able to cope. The fear of not being ready. That phrase became like a light anchor, something that keeps me steady, yet lets me move forward. And it's curious how, since then, I've begun to look at life through a different lens. Because it's one thing to live for the sake of living. It's another to live knowing that someone, from a place you can't see, believes in you. And more than that, someone who knows you to the core, who has seen your pain up close, who has held your hand in the most difficult moments, tells you, without hesitation, you are ready. This changes everything. It changes how you wake up, how you breathe, how you decide. It changes how you treat yourself, how you forgive, how you persist. And that phrase echoes to this day. On difficult days, it returns, sometimes in silence, sometimes in the midst of a song, a memory, a light breeze that passes and sends shivers down my spine. And I know I'm not alone. That there's a connection that isn't broken by absence, that transcends time, logic, the limits of matter. It's as if there were invisible shadows guiding our steps, offering signs, strengthening our journey. Waking up that morning was like leaving two worlds at once. My eyes opened slowly, but my body still didn't follow. For a few seconds, I didn't even know where I was. And perhaps the strangest thing was this, feeling like I'd returned from somewhere that, while seemingly distant, was actually within me. The sensation wasn't that of a simple dream. It was as if a part of me had traversed an invisible dimension, experienced something sacred, and now carried that memory engraved on my chest like a silent but powerful mark. The room was still dark. The morning light barely filtered through the crack in the window. But inside, I felt a rare clarity. There was no confusion, no doubt. I simply knew that what I had experienced, that embrace, that look, that phrase, was not a figment of my imagination. It wasn't the result of fatigue, nor of longing. It was something greater, a real presence, coming to me precisely in response to a request I could no longer put into words. And the peace that remained was indescribable. Even so, the mind tries to rationalize. Time passes, you get up, drink coffee, check your phone, but the vibration of that moment is still there, like a scent that lingers in the air after the person has left the room. And then, the signs begin to appear. Things that might have previously gone unnoticed, but now shine differently. An old song, exactly the one she loved, starts playing out of nowhere. A phrase in a book, spoken with the same words she would use. A butterfly that flies through the window and lands on your hand in the middle of the day. Small details, but together they form a language unique to you, as if the universe were saying, yes, it was real, and she's still close by. These signs don't require logic. They require presence, sensitivity, a willingness to feel what cannot be seen, to hear what is not spoken. And the more we open ourselves, the more we perceive. The more we understand that communication between worlds doesn't occur through scientific methods, but through attunement, through emotional frequency, through soul connection. And at that point, something in me began to truly change. The way I observed time, encounters, silences. My mindset gradually transformed, as if that moment had been the beginning of a new consciousness, an expansion, an awakening. Because once you experience something like this, you're never the same again. There's no way. Priorities shift. Your perception of life and death gains new layers. You stop seeing the end as an end and begin to see a broader, more mysterious, but also more loving cycle. Fear gradually dissolves, not because it disappears, but because you understand that the invisible is also real, that what you feel even without explanation has a purpose. That spiritual revelations aren't just pretty stories. They are experiences that stir our essence and sometimes even redefine our purpose. Waking up after something like this is like being born again. You feel like you've returned with a mission, that you have something to do, to share, to transform. And while there's gratitude, there's also a new responsibility to honor what was experienced. And that's where a new journey begins. A journey of awareness, of more aligned choices, of paying attention to the signs. Because afterward, you know, truly, that you're not alone. After that morning, something in me didn't just change. Something in me became something else. As if that previous version had completed a cycle, and now I stood before a new mirror, recognizing myself with wider eyes. The impact of that experience wasn't just emotional, it was structural. A kind of silent transformation that begins within and gradually reveals itself in gestures, words, and daily thoughts. It's not that I became a better person in the usual sense of the word, it's that I began to live with greater awareness, more presence, and more lightness, despite the pain that still lingered. That sentence, spoken with such clarity and love, made me see what I had previously only tried to accept, that even the harshest absence can carry a hidden purpose, that there is an intelligence behind the invisible that, although we cannot understand it logically, communicates with absolute precision with our soul. It was then that my mind began to open to truths I had previously refused to face. The truth that the control we try to have over life is actually an illusion, and that surrender, listening, feeling are far more powerful ways of being alive than any rational plan. I began to rethink my decisions, not out of fear of making mistakes, but out of a genuine desire to live coherently. Coherently with what truly matters. Coherently with the values she taught me in life and reaffirmed in an almost sacred way on that visit that felt like a gift from the other side. Coherently with my purpose, which until then I'd ignored out of distraction or haste, but which I now knew I needed to embrace, because that experience showed me that we're not here by chance, that there is a mission, even if it's not written in large letters, even if we discover it slowly, stumbling. And it was at this point in my journey that something even more profound happened. The faith I'd previously felt as merely an inherited belief began to pulse within me as something alive, organic, real. No longer an idea, but a force that walks with me. No longer something I sought outside, but something I now recognize within. Faith became the ground I stood on, even when everything around me seemed unstable. Because after feeling its touch, after hearing that phrase, after experiencing a truth that no logic can explain, the fear of death lost its power, and the will to live took on new meaning. This experience made me see time differently. Before, it was a line I tried to follow, always eager to get somewhere. Now, it's space. Space to be, to hear the silences that once troubled me, but which now seem full of answers, to feel the details, to perceive the messages that life, and perhaps those who have passed on, continue to send us every day between the lines of everyday life. This change wasn't a sudden change. It was a process that began with a hug that crossed worlds, and with words that pierced my soul. And because of that, every choice I make now carries more intention. Every gesture I offer carries more presence. Every look I exchange with someone carries more value. Because I know, with a certainty no technical explanation could offer, that there is something greater guiding us. Something that understands the losses, the silences, the prayers made with closed eyes, and that answers when we need it most. And perhaps most beautiful of all is realizing that this transformation continues, that visit wasn't an end, but a starting point, a kind of rebirth that reconnected me with everything I'd let slumber out of fear or pain. There's something you might never have stopped to think about. What if this kind of experience, this kind of contact, isn't just a spiritual exception reserved for a few? What if, in fact, the presence of the departed is always around us, just waiting for us to slow down, become silent within, and allow ourselves to notice? This completely changes the way we approach longing. It transforms grief into a bridge, and it makes silence a space of revelation, not absence. I began to notice this after that hug. It was as if my sensitivity had been fine-tuned. Suddenly, certain moments of the day carried a different weight. A scent that appeared out of nowhere, a song that played just as I was thinking about her, a random phrase someone said that, in some inexplicable way, answered something only she and I knew. These small signs began to form an invisible mosaic, constantly reminding me, she's here. Not in the body, not in the material, but in her presence. And it's incredible how that changes everything. You begin to live with your eyes more open, your heart more available, and a more sensitive ear for what previously went unnoticed. And the curious thing, the more you open yourself to this, the more these messages seem to arrive, as if the spiritual world responds to our call with a silent but constant generosity. It's not about seeing visions or hearing voices. It's about feeling with the soul. And when the soul feels, there is no doubt. There is only the calm certainty that true love knows no boundaries. Not of time, not of space. This isn't romanticizing pain. It's expanding consciousness. It's understanding that there's a framework behind the reality our eyes perceive. And that this framework is in motion, in care, in constant communication with those who are still here. When this awareness awakens, longing becomes fuel, absence becomes a guide, and each memory ceases to be a final point and becomes an invitation to continue. Because it's not just about accepting that the person is gone, it's about learning to live with the way they are. And if you ask me how this is possible, I would say there is no formula. There is openness. There is intention. There is love. And most importantly, there is listening. Life speaks to us. The invisible speaks to us. The question is, are you willing to listen? Because sometimes, what seems like mere coincidence is actually a subtle message. Sometimes, that dream that moves you so much is not a figment of your mind, but a real visit, the kind that comes to touch, comfort, and guide. And sometimes, it's your mother's very presence saying, in that way, only she could, "I'm here, my son." So today I invite you to truly reflect. What if your mother were trying to talk to you right now? Would you know how to recognize it? Could you hear beyond sound, feel beyond touch, trust beyond logic? This question isn't meant to be answered hastily. It's meant to be felt, because it opens doors. And who knows, by opening them, you might also realize you're not as alone as you thought, that there's an invisible network of love accompanying you every step of the way. And if by chance you've experienced something like this, or feel like you really want to, comment here, "I feel your presence." Let's transform this space in the comments into a place of sharing, faith, and truth. Every story you write here helps strengthen this invisible bond between us all. And if this kind of content touches your heart in any way, if it makes you think, feel, or see life differently, subscribe to the channel. Your presence here is what keeps all this alive and allows us to continue bringing messages like this to more people who, like you, are also on this journey.